As you heard on Bridge City News, former Liberal MPs Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott will run as independents in the upcoming federal election in October. Joining me now to talk about it is our political journalist, Brian Lilley. Brian, they had a chance to join Elizabeth May and the Green Party, but I guess it really didn't work out. And studies say if you're not affiliated with a party heading into an election, your chances of being reelected are pretty low at around 30%.
Yeah, and you're also at a disadvantage in terms of fundraising. This is something Jane Philpott was making clear on Monday. She was asking people for donations, but saying, look, I can't even give you a tax receipt. You can't get the tax credit, which is very generous. You donate to a federal politician affiliated with the party, you get a 75% tax return, Hal. So that means you give your local MP or your local challenger $100, you get $75 off your next tax bill. They can't offer that until the writ drops, until the election is officially underway. We know it's already underway. You know, Andrew Scheer is giving speeches on immigration policy, and Justin Trudeau is sending out Ahmed Hussein to denounce him. We know that the election campaign's underway, but it's not official. So they can't hand out tax receipts. They're at a disadvantage on so many fronts, but they are running as independents. If I were to, be a betting man, I would say at this point, I think Jody Wilson-Raybould has a stronger chance of being elected as an independent in Vancouver than Jane Philpott does in Markham-Stouffville. Markham-Stouffville is a swing riding. The Liberals squeaked by there, a few thousand votes last time, which sounds like a lot, but not in a sweep of Liberals going through the area. Her running, the Liberals running, the Conservatives could very well go to the Conservatives. Even though Jane Philpott was a very accomplished cabinet minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, a bit more star material coming out of this. And Vancouver, well, it's a little crazy. So she could definitely win out there.
So, Brian, did the Conservatives or maybe Jagmeet Singh and the NDP reach out to Jody Wilson-Raybould or Jane Philpott?
Well, I don't think the Conservatives would be a fit for either of the two women, but they did talk about how they had spoken to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, but they didn't talk to them very long, and it wasn't exactly a fit. They had more conversations with Elizabeth May and the Green Party, but in the end, they just felt like, no, let's do this as independents, and more power to them. I think either woman could be reelected. I just think it's more likely Jody Wilson-Raybould would be elected as an independent than Jane Philpott, but both women fully capable of pulling this off.
Brian, as you've seen, the out-of-control wildfires by high level here in northern Alberta are more than 100,000 hectares in size. And Federal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, well, she was actually laying the blame to Jason Kenney. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, because he doesn't like the carbon tax and he'll be cutting things, and so therefore it's his fault. Correct me if I'm wrong, Hal, but Jason Kenney was just sworn in as Premier of Alberta last week, and the wildfires were already well underway. But the Environment Minister wants to lay this on climate change. She wants to, the wildfires that happen every year. We could have a debate of, are they more intense? Are they happening more frequently? But anybody that lives in northern Canada, be it northern Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, they're used to wildfires. They happen each and every year with varying degrees of intensity, depending on the year, depending on the weather factors. This year is a tough year for northern Alberta, but for her to turn around and try and lay the blame for this on Jason Kenney's opposition to the carbon tax is nothing short of political posturing, of overheated rhetoric, of trying to smear your opponents and scare people. And quite frankly, I've covered Catherine McKenna for a long time now. Quite frankly, it's beneath her.
Brian, there's word now that the federal Liberals want to put a tax on soda, on pop, plastics, and selling your home. I guess when it comes to taxes, it seems like the Trudeau Liberals like all of them.
Yeah, well, they're already running on a carbon tax, and we know that, and that's why Catherine McKenna is, trying to lay the blame for the wildfires on Jason Kenney. She's openly talked about a plastics tax, and this has been endorsed by the government. Yes, we need a tax on plastics. Well, wait a minute. Plastics are a byproduct of oil, therefore they're subject to the carbon tax, so they're already being taxed. Never mind, they want another tax just for plastics. Now there's this document out from the Ontario Liberal Caucus putting forward ideas. One of them calls for a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, commonly called a soda tax, or, people kept yelling at me and saying, no one calls it soda in Canada, it's pop. Well, depends on where you live, actually. But either way, we all know what it is. There's going to be, they want a tax on that. But the crazy one, Hal, in my view, is a tax on selling your home. And this is an idea to deal with overheated, markets in Toronto and Vancouver specifically, and to deal with speculators. And they say if you sell your home after 1 year, you'll pay a 50% capital gains tax. After 2 years, it goes down to 25, then 10, then 15. Then after 5 years, you're still paying 5% to the government. Look, right now, you sell your personal residence, your primary residence. It's 100% tax free. There's no capital gains tax on it. How are you dealing with speculators if after 5 years of living in a home, you decide you're going to move on up like the Jeffersons, and suddenly you got to pay 5%? I mean, that could be tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what kind of home and what your down payment was, how much you were able to pay off in that time, how much it's appreciated. You could be paying tens of thousands of dollars to the government to deal with so-called speculators in let's say where you are in Lethbridge because the market in Toronto is overheated. No, that's just a tax grab.
Close to $600 million will be dished out to various media outlets in a federal bailout package. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer was not happy to hear that Unifor will be involved in determining who gets the cash.
I'm not happy to hear that Unifor will be a member of that panel, that they're going to be involved in that. And I'll tell you how, full disclosure, I am a member of Unifor. It's part of the terms of my employment at the Toronto Sun. I have to be a member of this union. Whether I want to be or not does not matter. I have to be a member. And this union, which represents thousands of media members in mainstream outlets across the country, is putting everyone in an awkward position because have you seen the photo of Jerry Diaz saying he's the resistance and Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare? Have you seen the ad campaign that they're backing from a group called Engage Canada that takes on Andrew Scheer? It's very partisan, it's anti-conservative, it's pro-liberal, and they're going to be on the panel, or at least pick somebody to go on the panel and decide which media outlets get the money. Andrew Scheer is right to call this out. Many journalists have called this out and said this is wrong, that this, the whole scheme actually puts the independence of the media in question. So this is a boneheaded move by the Liberals, but they're defending it. And Justin Trudeau this week, when questioned about it, has said, well, we believe in an independent media, not like the Conservatives who want to sell off CBC. I wish they wanted to sell off CBC. They don't. But, this is his defense. And even CBC, to their credit, have called out the Trudeau government on this and said, how can you put this organization, which has been so partisan, on the panel? And all they keep coming back to is, we believe in an independent media. Well, you can't be independent if one of the groups deciding if you get the money is out there campaigning for one side over the other.
And speaking of the CBC, if elected Prime Minister in the fall, Andrew Scheer says he will want to ensure that the CBC is telling more Canadian stories. It's understandable with the public broadcaster's appeared obsession with U.S. President Donald Trump and American politics.
Yeah, if you remember back a few years ago, CBC took a lot of flack because they bought the rights in Canada to shows like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, two very popular game shows that would air after the 6 o'clock news. And critics were going, well, wait a minute, how is this a good use of $1 billion plus year subsidy? You're bringing in American game shows, and now we'll go back to doing Canadian stories, and that's what we do. We tell Canadian stories. They have become as obsessed with Donald Trump. Well, not quite as obsessed as CNN, but almost. And Andrew Scheer says if he's elected prime minister, he's not going to sell them off like Justin Trudeau claims, but he will say, look, you want this money so that you can tell Canadian stories, actually tell Canadian stories. There have been times, Hal, when I have been watching CBC News and they have spent more time on a frivolous American story that involves Donald Trump than on serious public policy issues or scandals involving the Trudeau government. And that is simply wrong. Again, you have to wonder about the independence of the media, though, because who gave them an extra few $100 million a year or an extra few $100 million when they were first elected? Justin Trudeau. You talk to reporters on the Hill and say, when was the last time CBC broke a hard story against the Trudeau government? There's going to be an awful lot of people scratching their heads.
The new trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico is getting closer to becoming a reality after the tariffs on both steel and aluminum products were partially lifted, Brian.
Yeah, and you can only say partially because the Americans have actual language in the deal with Mexico that is effectively a tariff or at least a quota that if you go above the quota, the tariffs kick back in. The language is a little bit more nuanced with Canada, but a lot of people are now questioning and saying, wait a minute, did we actually get a win, or are we accepting quotas? Because if we have a free trade deal, if we have a trade deal with the Americans, why are we taking quotas? But it looks like we are taking quotas by another name for both steel and aluminum in order to get the tariffs lifted. So this is not the win that the Trudeau Liberals were putting forward. They said the tariffs had to go as a precondition of ratifying NAFTA or the USMCA. A lot of Republicans and Democrats in the United States said the same thing. They did not want this trade deal going forward. They would not vote for it if it were not, if the tariffs were not dealt with. The Trump administration put forward a proposal. We've accepted it. Now, as details start to emerge, a lot of questions about whether it's even actually a good deal for Canada.
Canada's made a claim for the North Pole, which is being disputed by both Russia and Denmark. Tell me more about that.
This has been an ongoing international competition for several years. It goes back to before the last election. And the former Harper government had put forward a major claim. And, you know, even when some Canadian scientists started saying, well, no, I think this, the Harper guys said no. They brought in different scientists and they brought in historians. And they're like, no, the North Pole is ours. We need to lay claim to this. Because Russia wants to go in and completely develop it. Denmark, not so much, but they probably develop it more than the Trudeau Liberals would. But I remember before the last election, Trudeau was asked about this, and he said, I'll just leave it up to the experts. He was asked, does the North Pole belong to Canada? I'll leave it up to the experts. Well, you have to decide who the experts are in Canada that you're going to listen to. Since he's been in government, he's obviously heard from enough of the bureaucrats to say, no, Canada must make this claim. Because if we do not, if we are not part of the group that controls the North Pole, then that will be wide open for resource development in ways that most Canadians probably wouldn't be on board with. I don't see Vladimir Putin having an awful lot of concern for the environment. If he finds that there's oil down there, he'll drill for it any way he can, environment be damned.
Malaysia is now joining the Philippines in demanding that Canada take back its garbage.
Yeah, I didn't know that we were a major exporter of garbage, but by the way, Canada's not alone in this. This started several years ago when China started saying, you can't send us your garbage anymore. You can't send us container ships full of plastics or garbage. And of course, we've watched this fight with the Philippines developed over the last little while. There were adult diapers in this waste that was supposed to be recyclables. And it turns out it wasn't. You know, it was shipped under false premises to the Philippines. And they said to Canada, you got to take it back. Well, at first they were dealing with the private company. The private company said no. Then they said to the government, you got to take it back. The government was dragging its feet, saying it's not really our fault. We didn't send it. And that's a fair point for the Trudeau Liberals. They didn't send it. But eventually, the Duterte government in the Philippines said, you take it back or I'm going to sail it over to Canada and drop it off. He got a win. The Canadian government said, we'll bring back, I forget how many containers it was. We'll bring them all back. We'll dispose of it here. Now it turns out that some companies have been doing the same thing in Malaysia, and they're now making similar noises, similar threats against Canada and a bunch of other countries. So again, we're not alone in this. This is not the government shipping over the garbage, I want to point out. These are private, unscrupulous companies telling whoever's accepting it at the other end, oh, it's this, and it turns out to be that, and nobody wants that. So expect another fight over the next little while to try and get this solved.
Let me ask you something. Is there an official apology coming from Ottawa?
The official garbage policy apology of 2019? Not that I've heard of yet. Not yet.
One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me from Toronto. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.